Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another podcast. Back here with Chris today on a nice 2022 Christmas edition. Going to be
Merry
talking
Christmas.
about Merry Christmas, everybody. Happy holidays. Hot chocolate in hand and Santa hat on head. Going to talk a little Astral Chain today. So, for starters, let's talk about the aesthetic.
Lead us off.
So Chris and I were talking a little bit before we recorded here about kind of referencing sort of like the anime structure. I like a little anime. I'm not the hugest fan of anime. I've seen, a couple movies, so I'm not an aficionado by any means. Akira, cool. Vampire Hunter D, cool. And I've seen a couple seasons of Attack on Titan anyway. Xenoblade Chronicles 3, tangent from Astral Chain real quick. Loved it. Very anime vibe to that game. But I got to say, I'm not always a fan of cell shading. It's Astral Chain has a lot of style to it. It does have substance. And I say that because I just watched this movie on Netflix, Bullet Train. You guys heard of it with like Brad Pitt and all these guys. Aaron Taylor Johnson is in it and everything. I watched it, thought it was like one of those, okay, it has a lot of style, not necessarily a lot of substance. But I'm 5 hours and 30 minutes into Astral Chain. I love the gameplay. There's a couple parts that have annoyed me a little bit. But cell shading, I'm just kind of, I'm not always into the cartoony aesthetic. There's a couple exceptions for me. Wind Waker is a big exception, which is funny because when that game came out, everybody was in an uproar about how it looked. To this day, I love how that game looks. But Astral Chain, I honestly would prefer it to have a more realistic vibe, or not vibe, but just graphical presentation, aesthetic in general. What do you think?
Oh man, I really like cell shading. But once again, I'm a big fan of anime, so I like things like that. Very cyberpunk, very Akira style about it. Love the use of like this police force that's handling these type of monsters. It just screams something that I would watch. And I cell shading can be cool. I don't know. I've never had a particular problem with it. I mean, I guess it depends on the medium and whatnot. I guess like a more graphic or gory game, I'd like a little bit more realistic. But anything past that, I'm like, cell shading just kind of works, you know. It never takes me out of it. I feel like it comes with these really cool, vibrant colors, and I think that things really pop on it, and so it's kind of like, oh, this is kind of dope just to kind of see. But no, character designs are great. Love the ability to kind of see some of the cities, see how it's put together. I mean, they really put a little bit of effort into it, especially for like a Switch game. To be honest with you, I feel like a lot of times Switch games are a little bit, like on a second tier graphic performance. And I mean, I think it's just because of the genre, not the genre, but I think it's just because of the audience for Switch games. Like they're not really out there to get your hardcore, shoot 'em up, kick the door down type of game. And so a lot of Switch games are, for all intended purposes, kind of simple. Not all, I mean, maybe I shouldn't say all of them, but a good majority of them are. And I don't want to use the word kiddie, but maybe more family friendly is the word that I'd like to use for a lot of their library. And so this game kind of it's right in between that really cool sweet spot for great for adults, but kids can still play. The control scheme is pretty straightforward. I mean, it's fast paced, it's interesting, it's fun. And so, like when I heard about it for a while, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna pick it up, I'm gonna pick it up, I'm gonna pick it up, and I just never got a chance to do it. And a buddy of mine, he had it and he had played it and he talked about it. I forgot we were just hanging out at a party and I was like, oh man, I really want to try Astral Chains. He's like, oh, I got it. You want to take it off me? I'm like, dope. And I really couldn't put it down. And I say that even though somebody who's not completed, because I have a tendency to do that sometimes. Just another game comes out or something else is going on in my life. But I put like 20 hours into that game and it's great. I mean, like if you got a Switch, it's definitely a purchase. It's definitely a purchase game. I think there's a lot of replay value because there are two characters, and I haven't played. Start off with the guy. You can choose between they're siblings, so you can choose between the brother or the sister. I chose the brother first, but like playing the game itself, it seems that the sister also has like her own little path that she has to take, and I think being able to play that later would be pretty dope. But I don't know. I think it's a pretty fun game. If you're looking for something that's a little bit off the beaten path for a Switch game, Astral Chain is your game.
Yeah, I would say as far as Switch exclusives, I mean, it's a great game. Like I said, so I'm 5 hours, 30 minutes into it. I think I'm on chapter 3 or 4. Chapter 3, I believe, or at the end of chapter 3. Um, Gotta say I'm enjoying the plot. Uh, and even though like I'm not the biggest fan of the aesthetic, I feel like I see what you're saying as far as, it definitely makes certain things pop. And when you go into like these astral planes, as they're called, like you go into these gates, like these interdimensional gates or whatever, and they call them the astral planes, and you got your legions in there, um, which is basically like this mech that you have on your astral chain, hence the name of the game. Yeah, certain things definitely pop. I will say the intro sequence was really cool. That was one thing that I thought the aesthetic worked really well with, is the opening kind of, you're on this really cool looking motor bike type of, like almost had like a Tron vibe to it,
Oh yeah,
with
oh
all
yeah,
the blues and kind
that's
of,
good. I like that Tron. Yeah, I didn't think of Tron. That's definitely more Tron-esque than anything.
yeah, blues and neons. But interestingly enough, the game also has reminded me of a couple other games that I didn't think it would, and I don't know if they took inspiration from these other games or what, but there's what's called red matter in the game, and you can use your legions to clean up this red matter that you can find like really in the other sections, these investigation sections that are more like almost detective like, almost Batman like in a way. And then you go into the astral planes and there's this red matter too, and you clean it up with your legion. And I was thinking Super Mario Sunshine.
I can see that.
This up.
It's funny that the investigations you're talking about very Batman-esque. I was like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
these little small little parts. Just to get a small little brief overview without giving up too much of the game for anybody who's probably never heard of it or whatever. Astral chains. Basically, there's this government entity that is handling these things that kind of corrupt the city. Just think of monsters or corruptions, and they got your regular police, and they have this other team that handles these actual things. And so they're able to take some of the monsters from this astral place and then put a chain on them. And for all intended purposes, probably, I don't know, I wouldn't use the word enslave, but kind of just control these monsters and use them to destroy these other monsters. So using the monsters to destroy the monsters, it's a special team, and not everybody can do it. And that's pretty much the game. You play as one of these people on the team, and the game has like its main core storyline. And within it, there's a whole bunch of side missions that you can do, completely optional. They're not going to change the story or whatever, but sometimes they unlock cool items. And I think they do a really good job of just making the game a little bit more interesting rather than just being this fast action pace beat 'em up for all intended purposes. And adding the additional monster that you can have, or the additional astral chain monster you can have, adds a little bit of more dynamic battle, because you can just fight regularly. You get a long range, medium range, and short range weapons. Switch on the fly, and then you can unlock this, quote unquote monster to help you out. There's a set time you can have them out, and they have their own move set. And the the actual learning curve isn't that bad. Honestly, they have a training room if you're actually struggling in the game, but to be honest with you, it kind of walks you through how to navigate that. So I'd say maybe the learning curve is like less than half an hour tops. And after that, I felt pretty confident using both the main character and the Astral Chain character.
And it's cool too, because with the astral chain characters, the legions that you're talking about, there's actually more than one that you can have. So far, and I don't have all, I believe there's like, I want to say like 4 of them, but based on like the little cursor that showed up after I've gotten my second one. But the first one, you get a guy with a sword. The second one, you get a guy with an arrow. So you have like those different abilities that you can use with the legions and everything. But yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the investigation parts. So, like you said, I mean, it has kind of like, the Batman vibe to it, especially if you played the Telltale games, Batman the Telltale series and its second season or series, whatever, Batman the Enemy Within, which is almost more of like, the kind of choose your own adventure type of game. But it has like these detective moments where you're kind of investigating clues and everything. And so, yeah, that came to mind when I was playing these investigation parts. And it adds, I think, in my opinion, a really good balance to the game, because without it, I think it would feel a little bit more of just a beat 'em up. And there's other people out there that have like talked about it being an RPG. I disagree with that personally. I mean, it has, you've got like these tiny little shops and you got your HQ where you can buy things and stuff. And there's vending machines out in the world, but I don't know. It's almost like saying I can go out in GTA and buy a can of Coke at a vending machine, and therefore GTA is an RPG. You know,
Yeah, I wouldn't. I think sometimes maybe people, because there's a lot of things you could. Whenever people, I think sometimes people get like a little bit confused, and maybe not confused. A lot of things kind of blend when you can change your character's appearance, and when you can upgrade weapons and equipment. You tend to think, oh, this is, these have RPG elements. Are there some RPG elements? Of course, being able to upgrade your legion, being able to upgrade your equipment, being able to change your aesthetic on the, as you see fit, which is really cool. But I wouldn't use the word RPG. It's definitely an action adventure game, and it would just be an action game if they didn't have the side quests. And like I said, sometimes the side quest is literally trying to find who robbed somebody or chased somebody. Or I think there's one where you have to help a kid carry ice cream, which is hilarious. Really hated that mission. Anybody who knows that game really hated that side mission, but I needed to beat it. I was like, no, I need to get this ice cream to this girl. And the world's lively. There's NPCs you can talk to. So yeah, there's a lot of elements, but I wouldn't necessarily say that that's RPG personally. I mean, to each their own, obviously.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the first thing I'll touch on to that is, so I have not seen that side mission yet. It sounds hilarious, but you also made it sound very annoying, and
I mean, like I said, it's not anything that's gonna ruin. There's a girl on a bridge and she's having a bad day, and you're like, I'm gonna go get ice cream, and you go to this ice cream store across the way, and it's not that far. It's far enough, but it's not that far, and you get to choose how many scoops you want to put on there. And I'm like, oh, max scoops, obviously, it's like 10 or 15 scoops.
wait, I gotta guess. You come back and she's like, no, I wanted sprinkles on it, or I only wanted 2 scoops, and you got to get it just right.
No, not at all. You got to get it to her. They have, so that if you have a switch, and just like Zelda, they have like the gyroscope and the switch, right? And so you have to kind of use your analog stick and the gyroscope to keep the ice cream from
Oh,
falling. So ice cream's tipping, so you can't run. And then what sucks is as you're running through the world, now there's a whole bunch of characters that are just a whole bunch of NPCs that are just running at you, and you have to kind of avoid them, and they hit you. Not, I mean, I swear I've done this. I had to do this mission at least over 15 times, and it costs money. Like you have to spend your own money in the game to buy the ice cream. The ice cream's not expensive, but I mean, if you do it 10 times, I mean, like, well, this is a lot of money for whatever. But I can't help myself. I'm a completionist at times, so I'm like, ooh, I want to really complete this mission. And you give her the ice cream, and she's just happy. That's about it. Annoying. It's so annoying. It's so annoying. And like they got this little thing that shows you the ice cream, and you're like, oh no, the ice cream's gonna fall. Half the time I couldn't even get to the escalator. Half the time I just couldn't get to the escalator. The ice cream would just fall. There's cars in the street, and you have to wait for the light. You don't have to wait for the light, I don't think. No, you do have to wait for the light. And it's so annoying. So annoying. It's terrible. But I loved it. It was great.
so I'm definitely not a completionist. I mean, for me, that sounds like something I might try. I would give that maybe 3 times, and
Oh,
then I
I need to do
like,
it.
oh, I'm done. I'm
Nope,
done.
I was like, I need to do it. And there's other, what's really cool is there are other missions like that, puzzle missions. That one is not a puzzle. I want to be very clear, that's not a puzzle. But they had other missions that were kind of puzzle-esque. I think there's this one where you have to help. There's an accident because you're like, not only are you this Legion police, you're like police. So like there's like this accident that happens in a bridge, you need to move these cars using your legions to help you move the car, and it's kind of like one of those Tetris puzzles or whatever. But no, I mean they really do a good job of just throwing in a lot of stuff to kind of keep the game interesting, keep you on your feet. They I listen the Batman reference. They have like the investigative mode. Like you can switch to investigative mode. You can see like a in between the real world and the astral train world. And sometimes you see evidence. You're like, ooh, this is where this guy was last time. Let's follow here. So it's got the game for a Switch game. It's got a lot. Like that's what I dug about it so much. Like for a Switch game, it really is almost feels like a full fledged game. It probably is. Plays great on handheld, plays great on TV. Easy purchase. I think it's still pretty expensive now. If you get it, it's like 40, $30 or something.
Which I got, my copy at the library, and they'll let you keep it for 3 weeks. So hopefully I'll be able to,
That's a really long time. You can complete a game in 3 weeks. That's not hard at all.
No, and I've heard Astral Chain is about 20, 30 hours. So relatively, which is insane to say, but relatively, I don't know, maybe average these days.
No, I think a lot of games. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's probably 30 or 40 hours if you do all the other junk. But if you just run through the campaign, it's probably 15 to 20 hours.
Yeah,
I mean, it's got replay value.
They were also saying, I don't know if you played Live Alive. I played the demo. I really enjoyed it, but honestly didn't have time for it with other things I've been up to. But with Live Alive, they said it was like 20 hours, which you hear, 20 hours, that's kind of short these days. But
yeah, because it's funny. Me and my brother were having that conversation over a few weeks ago. We were at my mom's house. We were just hanging out. I think it was like maybe the day after Thanksgiving. My mom likes to do Thanksgiving, which is like the entire family, and then Thanksgiving part two, which is just children and significant others. And my brother and his wife, they play video games together. But sometimes she's a little bit like MIA. She's just not feeling it. And so we were talking about how they had played. She's like, "Well, you played." And then I was like, "Well, how long?" And she was like, "Well, all together, probably like 5 or 6 hours." And I was like, "That's not enough. You really got to put it. I mean, at any game, I think you have to put in at least 15 hours. I think at that 15-hour mark for most games, you've gotten past the point of tips and new information. Now they're just kind of like, okay, now you know how to play, so just play the game now. So 20 hours maybe might, I don't know. It's definitely the new normal. It's definitely the new normal. 20 hours is that like that's if the game isn't 20 hours, it really isn't a game. It's probably a DLC at that point. But
which that's insane to me, and I think you're dead on with that comment. But yeah, you were talking about seeing things that you normally wouldn't see in those investigation parts. So you're talking about turning on what they call this iris thing.
That's what it was called.
Yeah,
Yes.
into the detective mode. And I'm kind of glad I played this other demo first. If you've heard of this game AI, the Somnium Files, and
I've heard of it. I know nothing of it.
It has a sequel called the Nirvana Initiative, I believe, and I've seen some reviews that say the second one is like a 10 out of 10 hidden gem masterpiece. I've not played the second one, but there's a demo, or at least there was a demo for the first one. Played it with my brothers over Thanksgiving. Really enjoyed it, actually, surprisingly. Never heard of it, but really enjoyed the demo, and it had a very similar investigative thing to it, involving basically an eyeball. So like the AI, so to speak. So it was kind of funny. Like,
Okay.
Astral Chain, Iris, interesting, and a similar thing.
AI.
Now, one interesting thing, since I'm a musician, the music in Astral Chain is kind of all over the place.
Yes, I love music, and in addition to music, I love video game music. And I wouldn't use the words bad, but I would definitely say non-rememberable. I really don't remember any of the music in Astral Chain. A lot of it's kind of I want to sound like an old man, beeps and bops,
Ticking in the tin.
it's I mean, I think it's supposed to be like high octane, like things are happening, but like I think it's just like I really don't be paying attention. Maybe nothing that struck me as like, oh man, like because some games like the battle music comes on and you're like, it's fight time. You know, I hear it's not even about who's on screen. It's about I hear the tone, I know what's up. It's time for me to get busy, you know. And it's not it's not bad, but it wasn't anything I was like, yeah, yo, this is a great track. I don't think there's any music that I heard throughout the game where I'm like, this is a great track, and I'm enjoying hearing it. Most times I'm like, oh, they're playing some track. Let me just get my stuff done. Let me do this side mission. Let me go talk to this guy. You know, sometimes you hear music and you're like, man, this is really good. And you're like, let me just kind of chill out in this town for a bit, you know.
No, I know exactly what you mean. And actually, I'm sure a lot of people have heard of Undertale. So I tried Undertale recently, and that game has some amazing music. But you're talking about video game music. I'm actually a guy that I've been to the Zelda Symphony Orchestra twice, and I've been to video games live a couple of times, and I did get to meet Tommy Tallarico, which was a lot of fun.
Ooh.
He's a nice guy. But just seeing some of those tracks, like say for example, Shadow of the Colossus is the first thing that comes to mind. Just an amazing track when you fight the Colossi in that game. Chrono Trigger had amazing music. Final Fantasy VI had amazing music. To name a
Chrono Trigger did have amazing music. Chrono Trigger had some bangers.
Memories of Green was one of my favorite from Chrono Trigger. Robo's theme was hilarious just because it was pretty much a Rickroll, and Frog's theme was amazing. But of course, so many Zelda tracks over the years. Midna's Desperate Hour or Midna's Lament, depending on who you ask, is a really amazing piano track from Twilight Princess. But yeah, I gotta agree. So like, I really like some of the music, but I totally agree with you that like after I shut the system off, I won't hum anything. Whereas Final Fantasy VI or Final Fantasy III, whatever you want to say, that I have played on an emulator a few years back, so it's not like it's been 25 years or whatever since I've played it. But I could, get my guitar out and start playing a riff from the Dark World from Final Fantasy VI that it's just been in there since like I was.
Yeah, there's tracks in video games that like you could if somebody played an Astral Train a track right now, and they asked me to tell, and they're like, just play some track, and they're like, what's this from? I'll probably be like, I don't know, I couldn't tell you, but other games you hear it, and you're like, oh, I know, like even if I don't know the name of the song, I know where that's from. There's this tone or there's these keys or instruments that are used for certain video games, and I'm like, no, that's Zelda, that's Final Fantasy, that's whatever. So it's not bad. It's not going to ruin it if you play the game. It's not going to ruin your game. Hell, I barely remember the police station music, and I don't even think I liked it that much. I was just kind of like, well, let me just do my stuff here.
So that's interesting that you say that, because I was going to say that the one track that is semi-memorable to me, or the one track that like I kind of enjoy. I shouldn't say the one track that I kind of enjoy, because I do enjoy the music, like when I'm fighting one of the chimeras and it gets like all metal or something, it gets
Yeah,
into it, and it's like it's fitting at the time.
it's very fitting.
Yeah, it is very fitting, but it's like you walk away like, okay, it's kind of like watching like a generic action blockbuster where the music isn't composed by Hans Zimmer or somebody, and you're like, okay, yeah, cool, and you walk away and you don't remember any of it.
Right.
But the police station, I actually do remember, and part of it is because I feel like I'm not like a big Dead fan. I have no idea if they're still around. I would assume they are, but it kind of reminded me of that just because I remember playing the GoldenEye reimagining on
Oh, okay.
on Wii a few years ago, where it was more like they had Daniel Craig in it doing the voice, and like it was very reimagined stages and everything, and it played more like Call of Duty than the original GoldenEye.
Good night.
It was like, here's a checkpoint, you have like 300 meters or whatever to go, you need to go in that direction, as opposed to the original GoldenEye where you're just figuring out where to go and the objectives and you're sneaking around more so. But there is a stage in that game where you go into a club and there's music playing, and it's I believe it actually is by Deadmau5 that's like in that club stage you're playing. And when I was walking around the police station in Neuron, as they call it, Neuron HQ, that's what it reminds me of.
Okay.
It also gives me, I don't know if you played Xenoblade Chronicles X, it gives me like kind of, it reminds me of Xenoblade X a little bit, just in terms of its It has like the serious tone to it, serious kind of. Aside from it has some comic relief. We can talk about Lappy. Um, but aside from that, or the ice cream you mentioned, again, I'm only 5 hours in, so maybe the rest of the game is hilarious, and I don't know. But I feel like it has a pretty serious tone to it that I.
No, Lappy's probably Lappy's just a character in the game. We won't get. I mean, we can get into it a little bit later, but Lappy's pretty much like the most comical part of the game. I mean, every now and then they may the other characters in Neuron might say something humorous or something that is quote unquote out of their character that makes it funny, but it's pretty it's pretty. Now I wouldn't use the word bleak. That's not the word I would use. It's just people there are trying to do something. They're like we're trying to complete this task. The world's coming to an end or whatever it might be going on. But Lappy is probably the and even then, like they later in the game, they kind of like throw, they kind of like throw. I mean, Lappy's still there, but like they kind of give you like the joke behind it, and then it's just kind of like this thing. It's kind of a gimmick. I would even call it funny, just at a certain point, just like it's a gimmick. It's like, oh, it's Lappy. Lappy's the gimmick. You might get a chuckle or smile out of me, but I'm not gonna be like, ooh.
Yeah, I mean, it made me kind of chuckle, but like nothing. Trying to think of what the last kind of laugh out loud game I played was. I feel like there was one recently. Undertale actually is pretty funny.
Oh, Undertale. I've never played it. I've seen parts and bits. I've always wanted to play it. I've heard nothing but great things about it. The music is wonderful. To be honest with you, that's the first thing that I heard and knew about Undertale was the music. I was like, "What is this great music?" And they're like, "Oh, it's from Undertale." And I was like,
Yeah,
"Why am I like?" Because I have a Spotify playlist, video game music, and like all these like fantastic 8-bit chip tune music's coming out, and I'm like, "This is dope." Side note, just side note. Scott Pilgrim versus the World, that also has some great music. Scott Pilgrim versus the World. But anyway, Undertale. The first thing I heard about Undertale was the music, and then after that was the game.
yeah, it's really good, and it's different too. Note on Undertale in that you can play as like a pacifist, so to speak, and you can show mercy to all the enemies. It's real. That's a really funny game. Come to think of it, but yeah. So with Astral Chain, I mean, like, yeah. So it sounds like we're on the same page. Not super memorable music, but it's fitting music. Hey, aesthetic, bless you.
Thank you.
Aesthetic is very fitting. I mean, it definitely makes things pop at times. I forget if I've already mentioned this, but so I alluded to reminded me of Mario Sunshine with cleaning up the red matter, but also Twilight Princess with the Astral Planes, just in terms of like like the Twilight realm, so to speak. And you even see like shades of like I don't know if shades is the right word, shadows of people walking around.
Right.
Um, so yeah, it's been pretty interesting.
It's
Um,
also cool that I talk about the iris, like people
yeah,
who are like infected with like the dark matter, killing them. Like you'll see people like, oh man, I just feel like garbage, and you put on the iris, and you're like, oh, they
Blue
feel
Man.
like they're sick. I heal them. They're like, oh, I feel great. I don't know what that was because not everybody can see the astral legion monsters.
It,
I'm not sure if you noticed, but like you can get points for throwing away trash. Have you done that?
you know what? It's funny you mentioned that because I was at I think it's the second investigation part. It's the one where like you're going around, you're looking for clues as you do in all of the investigations. But there's the part with like the five brothers quiz.
Oh yeah, that took me like maybe just a few minutes. I was like, wait a minute, I had to get a pin. What really helped us just got a
Turn
pin.
the iris on. Yeah, and then it was like, which one of us is the oldest? Well, let me turn the iris on and see. Um, but you mentioned like you could get points for like cleaning up garbage and whatnot. I walked around and I saw boxes, so I instinctively got out my baton and started hitting them. And then it was like -10, -10, and then the girl, because I'm playing as the guy right now. I think Akira, not Akira, but Akira, I guess. She was like, "Hey, what are you doing? Stop it!" Like, why? What? -10, -10, -10. Okay, cool.
Oh,
Like,
hey man, hey, I'm recycling, man. Every time I see a can, I'm like, I want to pick this can. You can pick up like all the cans and then go to the garbage can. You don't have to pick up a can and go to the garbage can. So I'll pick up like 16 cans as I'm moving around the city, and then I'll find a garbage can. And be like, oh man, you're saving the planet. I'm like, man, they really want you to be a cop. You know, they really want you to be an officer of the law. But the action's great. The action I'll tell you one thing. The action's fluid. It's great. It's fun. Controls are responsive, and it's almost like playing two because the legion that's attached to you kind of will do their own thing, but you can tell it to do things, which is really cool. And you can tell it to do these things while you're doing your thing. You can attack, you can block, you can move around, you can do combo moves. There's a blocking system and a parry system. I mean, it's a lot of fun. And when you first start playing it, you kind of like focus on just playing the main character. You're like, I'm just working with him, and then my legion will kind of do whatever it is. And maybe after like I said, where you're at, maybe 5 hours, 6 hours in, like I found myself like making sure that I was like using both, like, and you can't use both as much as you like to, because like I said, you do have the time limit as far as how long they can be out. Obviously, there's things you can do as far as defeating the other monsters, or doing certain tricks or moves in battle that will extend your time. There's items that you can find using your iris to extend your time, but I think it's a really cool. I think it's a really cool system, because sometimes depending on how many enemies are on the field, it can be a little bit much to kind of control all this. So like having that little time that you can have the Legion out is really helpful, because it's like, okay, I can do things by myself, and then if things get a little bit hairy, then I can use the Legion. So you're kind of taught. The game kind of teaches you not to rely heavily upon it. You can do a lot of things on your own. It's really kind of an assist, which is really cool.
Yeah, with the Legion gauge and everything out for a limited time. Yeah, oh man, it can definitely get chaotic on screen. It can definitely get chaotic, but I mean, I've never had like any slowdown, never like any frame rate issues.
Oh no, not at all. I mean, literally, there'll be like 16 people on screen, my legion, and then as you can control the legions, how far or close they are to you using your other stick, which is which is cool. And also sometimes, I mean, the game does a really good job with the camera control, so that when I am using my legion and I can't move the camera around, I'm just controlling the legion. They really do a good job of just kind of zooming out, zooming in, so I can kind of get an idea of what's going on the battlefield. But I love that there's no frame rate drop. I love that it's still as fluid as it is when you do have your Legion or don't have your Legion. Um, it works, like they like I said, they just didn't throw your random beat 'em up and then throw some other cool aspect on it. I feel like they really took the time to figure out how to use it, how to really emphasize on the good times, the right times, or the inappropriate times that you use your Legion, and not making it like the main. It's a dual thing. It really is. And each legion that you get in the game has its own abilities and works better for certain enemies than it does other enemies. So you're not just like reliantly heavily on one legion. Like you really find yourself being like, oh, okay, because it's this boss or this enemy or this type of attack. I mean, there are times, man, there are times where you fight certain bosses and you have to use one legion to do something, and then after that you got to switch to the other one. It's really cool.
Yeah, there's one move in particular on the Legions too that is almost like pro wrestling, almost, and that like you have your chain out and it's almost like a clothesline as like an
Oh
enemy,
yeah, that okay, yeah.
and it
There's
bounces far back.
that.
So
Like if they're charging
yeah,
at you, use your clothesline. That's super dope.
yeah, that's what I call it, is the clothesline.
And then they have
So
the other one where you can like wrap your legion around somebody and chain them
right,
down.
and then,
That's super hot. No, that's
so
super great.
I
The
will
game.
say, and you mentioned Zelda before, and I did too with the Astral Planes, but I will say, so this is one thing that has annoyed me a little bit so far, is there is a slash move. And so it's with the sword legion, and it's
Mhm.
where like you might have like some blocks moving around or whatever, and then there's like three lasers that you need to chop through type of thing, and it gives me a Skyward Sword vibe, and I don't like it.
I forgot about that. That is particularly not fun. You're right. When they're like, "Oh, you got to use
So it's
the,"
not
I'm
just
like,
me.
"Yeah, that's usually not fun." I'm trying. What? Are there any other cons you can think of that's one of the cons I can think of.
Honestly, I mean, it's an addictive game. I'm 5 hours and 30 minutes into it, and the fact that I don't have as much patience as I do when I was younger. and I'm still going with this. Partly because I also know I have a 3-week loan on it. You know, I'll say, well, I guess the only other section there is one of the astral planes. I hit there's like a switch on the floor, and it's right when you find the strange drone, or right around the time you find the strange drone, you hit a switch on the floor, and you clearly know that your Legion needs to touch another switch.
Right.
And it's like, well, it's got to be around here somewhere. And if you look enough, you realize like there's another block on top that you needed to go up to or whatever. But the way it's presented, it was almost like the switch should be on the same level type of thing. So that actually took me
Yeah,
through.
I know what you're talking about. Sometimes
And
the objectives are saying, "Oh, it's right here," and I'm like, "Well, I am right here."
yeah,
And you
exactly. So I was
kind of
like,
have
what?
to,
Am I doing something wrong? Is the game wrong? What's going on? So
and it's not as simple as just like looking around. Sometimes, like you're like, it's there, but like, okay, I have an idea it's over there, but like nowhere around here is there a way to get up there, and then you have to like backtrack a little bit, and you're
right,
like, oh yeah, this path that I felt like was going nowhere uh, was the right path to kind of go to where we need to get to. Because there are times where you're able to do like make these long jumps sometimes with your Legion, which is kind of cool. But sometimes you forget about it. Like they'll be like, "Oh, you get to this block," and you're like, "Well, obviously I can't get there." And then you remember that if you control your Legion and take your Legion right to the spot, your Legion can pull you in because you guys are chained up. Astral Chain. There's the name of the game.
and on that note, I know we both had some limited time today, so I think that's a good place to wrap up. Yeah, it's a great game. So if you haven't checked out Astral Chain, go ahead and check it out. Merry
Oh
Christmas,
man,
Happy holidays, everybody.
at the very least it's a rent, but personally, it's a purchase. Go, you're not gonna have a bad time if you buy it. Please, if you want to. I mean, you can also go to the library. The library lets you rent it for 3 weeks, and then after 3 weeks, you'll probably want to buy it. Who knows?
There you go. Take care,
Merry
everybody.
Christmas.